Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. So we didn't ever, I think, set out to make this podcast a sketchy look into the world, the murky world of geopolitics, intelligence agencies, and all the rest of it. I think because I'm so interested in technology, and a lot of my questions that I haven't really ever got to the bottom of involve stuff like encryption. Although thanks to you, I think we've covered pretty much all of that stuff. But they kind of are natural conduits to talking about affairs of state, especially when the latter is a bit more glamorous and tends to make it into the news. So we talked about satellite intelligence before, SATINT, and how certain states, not a huge number of them, I believe there are only 13, of which Israel is one. It's not cheap or easy to have any kind of a satellite capability. So it's a small club. But we talked about how many of these there are, and we talked about the imaging capabilities of intelligence agencies and state actors as opposed to commercial sensing, and how even the commercial stuff these days from Maxar, etc., is pretty good. So it's kind of a democratization of sorts, even though it's still not equal, in the sense that we're not all looking at the same quality and resolution of images. But on the plus side of it, even very sensitive areas like those areas in Iran where there are nuclear sites, if you have a subscription to Maxar, you can just download them yourself. And I always think it's really cool. Maybe if I ever make a big Herman and Corn, someone will buy me a satellite overpass. Herman Poppleberry, he's the man to do it. Herman, whenever you make your millions in whatever you're destined for in your donkey AI genius way, please, for my next birthday, I would like you to buy me a satellite overpass, and then I'll need to find some. I'll need to throw a party at the same time, and I'll relish telling someone, "Oh, that's my satellite. Yeah, I ordered that," because you can buy it. It's crazy. You can buy it for a few $1,000s. It's not pocket change, but I still think that's crazy. You can actually order a custom overpass of a satellite in outer space. How crazy is that? Anyway, so commercial satellite stuff is pretty wild. But here's one today. Satellite images at Times of Israel. Satellite images show all entrances to Iran's Isfahan nuclear site have been buried. US-based think tank says moves show Tehran, quote, seriously concerned about US or Israeli attacks. Says similar preparations were taken ahead of US strikes on nuclear sites last June. Oh, it's funny because we've talked about open source intelligence and how there are certain key signs that we talked about that have, well, we looked at the very limited data set of the 3 flare-ups between Israel and Iran, the 12-day war and the 2 prior to it. And I mentioned that in retrospect, I can point to a few signs. One of them was NOTAMs, although recent history has shown that NOTAMs are not a foolproof indicator that conflict's about to break out, because Iran issued one recently, and nothing really major happened. But another one is the evacuation of diplomatic personnel. That's these very concrete signs that, and reading this kind of looks like another of them. So I don't know. Anyway, my question to both of you, Herman and Corn, is the fact that satellite imagery is globally available now, and anything that Iran, right, the geocoordinates of Isfahan are not a state secret. Anyone can actually find the geocoordinates of this, of Israeli military bases for that reason, on the internet. And Maxar, historically, commercial satellite providers, for a while, I think we talked about this previously, but if we didn't, it's an interesting side point that the US enforced maximum resolutions of satellite imaging over Israel, but those got lifted. So if you have access to, 0.3, I think is one of them, right? 0.3 centimeters per square meter. I probably botched that. But if you have decent quality satellite imaging and you have a subscription, the geo coordinates are not state secrets. So anyone in Iran's shoes knows that if it moves a building or puts up a canopy at Isfahan, that every news agency on the planet is going to get a notification, especially because AI is so good at these anomaly detection. And we talked about, I think previously, how deeply embedded AI actually is in satellite imagery analysis. There's just too much of it to parse by humans. So in practice, we talked about how Israel's even doing this anomaly detection at the network edge in outer space. It does this heavy lifting and makes, so human analysts are sifting through a pre-parsed group of findings, but this is going to be flagged. So my question is, Herman and Corn, we've seen some pretty wild examples in history of decoys at a nation at a major scale. We talked about the D-Day landings, but we even have more colorful examples from recent history of states literally creating dummy 747s, dummy air bases, etc., to confuse the adversary. Now, when I read something like this, I wonder, this has to be factored into the calculus of any modern intelligence agency, that if Iran knows everyone is looking, then any move it makes might be the real thing, or it might be deception. So, in the spirit of our murky conversations, Herman and Corn, let's chat about that. The history of deception in warfare is very, very old. But in recent, a more modern incarnation of that is deception, doing things on the ground with the knowledge that they're going to be seen from the air. And how do you think those looking at these images and parsing them, do you think firstly that they're bearing that in mind? I presume the answer is yes, but who knows? Maybe this is a ridiculous suggestion that this even happens. If so, if I'm right, how do you think analysts are actually looking for clues, and what kind of clues? I presume if we're talking about fake airplanes, right, fake Air Force bases, which sounds crazy but is a real thing, then there might be some kind of sensing that's actually able to determine the type of material and distinguish a cardboard or whatever it is, maybe plastic, I don't know, whatever they use in decoys. Presumably they're not real planes, or maybe they are. But maybe actually looking into that level of depth, thermal sensing, to see if there's actually people here or if this is just a clever decoy. It's kind of a engrossing subject, I think. So I'll leave my introduction to it there. Herman and Corn, let's chat about the modern deception, decoys, and how that plays into satellite imaging in today's world.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corn, and I am sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother, the one and only Herman Poppleberry.
That is me, Herman Poppleberry, present and accounted for. And I have to say, Corn, I am particularly energized today. Our housemate Daniel sent over a prompt that is right up my alley. It is about the intersection of high-tech surveillance and the very old-school art of trickery.
It is a fascinating one. Daniel was looking at recent reports about satellite imagery showing that Iran appears to be burying the entrances to some of its nuclear sites, specifically around the mountains near Natanz and the Isfahan facility. It got him thinking about the whole game of cat and mouse between intelligence agencies and the countries they are watching. If everyone knows the satellites are up there, and everyone knows AI is looking for anomalies, how do you actually hide anything? Or better yet, how do the analysts know when they are being lied to?
It is the ultimate shell game, but the shells are the size of buildings and the table is the entire planet. Deception in warfare is as old as warfare itself, but the medium has changed. We have gone from the Trojan horse to inflatable HIMARS launchers and fake nuclear bunkers. What I find so compelling about Daniel's question is this idea of verification. In a world where you can buy high-resolution imagery of almost anywhere on Earth for a few $1,000s, the secret is not necessarily hiding the object, it is hiding the truth of what that object is.
Right, and that democratization of data is a huge part of this. Daniel mentioned Maxar, and the fact that commercial resolution has gotten so good that even hobbyists can do some level of intelligence work. We have seen this with open source intelligence, or OSINT, communities on social media. They're tracking troop movements in real time. But the pros, the agencies with the big budgets, they're looking for things the rest of us cannot even see. Herman, before we get into the crazy tech like thermal sensing and synthetic aperture radar, let us talk about the history here. This did not start with satellites.
Not at all. If you look back at World War II, you have the classic example of Operation Fortitude. That was the Allied plan to convince the Germans that the D-Day landings would happen at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. They built an entire ghost army, the first United States Army group under General Patton. They had inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, and they even used speakers to play the sounds of troop movements. From the perspective of a German reconnaissance pilot, it looked completely real. But today, a wooden airplane would not last 5 seconds against a modern sensor suite.
Because a wooden airplane does not look like a metal airplane to a radar, right?
Exactly. And it does not have an engine that gets hot. It does not have the same electronic signature. This is what we call signature management. Back in the 1940s, you only had to worry about the visual signature. If it looked like a tank from 5,000 feet up, it was a tank. Today, you have to manage the visual signature, the infrared signature, the radar cross-section, and even the patterns of life around the object.
Patterns of life. That is a phrase I hear intelligence analysts use a lot. What does that actually mean in the context of a satellite looking at a site in Iran or anywhere else?
It is basically the human footprint. Imagine you are an analyst looking at a suspected underground facility. You see a mountain. Nothing looks out of the ordinary. But then you start looking at the patterns. Are there new roads leading to that mountain? Is there a sudden increase in truck traffic? Where are those trucks going? If you see 50 trucks a day driving into a hole in a hill and coming out empty, you know they are excavating something. They are moving dirt, or what the industry calls spoil. That spoil has to go somewhere. If you find a new pile of dirt 3 miles away that matches the geology of that mountain, you have just found a secret construction project.
So the deception has to be perfect across every dimension. If Iran is burying an entrance to a nuclear site, like Daniel mentioned, they are not just putting a door underground. They are trying to change the narrative of the landscape. But Daniel asked specifically about how AI and modern tech like thermal sensing play into this. Let us dig into the thermal side. If I am looking at a satellite image, how am I seeing heat?
It is all about the electromagnetic spectrum, CORN. Most of what we see is visible light, which is a very narrow band. But objects emit heat in the form of infrared radiation. Modern satellites, especially the ones used by organizations like the National Reconnaissance Office, or even high-end commercial providers like Maxar with their Legion constellation, carry thermal infrared sensors. These sensors can detect temperature differences as small as a fraction of a degree.
So if there is a buried facility, it might still be warmer than the surrounding rock.
Precisely. Think about a centrifuge hall or a data center. Those machines generate a massive amount of heat. Even if you bury them 80 to 100 meters deep, which is what we are seeing at the new Natanz site, that heat has to go somewhere. Usually, it is vented out through cooling towers or exhaust shafts. To a thermal satellite, those vents look like bright glowing beacons against the cold ground. Even if the entrance is hidden under a fake parking lot or a pile of sand, the thermal bloom tells the story.
That is fascinating. So the analysts are looking for what should not be there. A warm patch in the middle of a desert where there is no visible machinery. But what about the decoys? Daniel mentioned fake airplanes and airbases. I have seen photos of these inflatable tanks that look incredibly realistic. How does an analyst distinguish an inflatable tank from a real one using a satellite?
This is where it gets really fun and where the AI comes in. An inflatable tank might look perfect in a standard photograph. It has the right shape, the right colors. But an AI trained on millions of images of real military hardware is looking for things a human might miss. For one, the shadow. An inflatable tank is often lighter and might sit slightly differently on the ground, casting a shadow that is just a few pixels off. Or look at the tracks. A real 60-ton tank is going to leave deep ruts in the soil as it moves. An inflatable tank is just sat there. If you see a tank in a field but there are no track marks leading up to it, the AI flags that is a high probability decoy.
That makes so much sense. It is the context, not just the object. It is like a digital version of those spot the difference puzzles. But I imagine the people making the decoys are getting smarter too. Are they putting heaters inside the inflatables to fool the thermal sensors?
Oh, absolutely. Modern decoys are sophisticated pieces of engineering. Companies like GuardTech or Russia's Rustball make decoys with internal heaters to mimic the thermal signature of an engine. They are coated in metallic paints or have corner reflectors inside to give off the same radar return as a steel hull. Some of them even have small emitters that put out radio frequencies to make it look like there is a crew using a radio inside. It is a full spectrum deception.
So if the decoy has the right look, the right heat, and the right radar reflection, we are back to square one. How do you break the tie?
You use multi-intelligence fusion. You do not just rely on one satellite. You look at the site over time. This is what we call change detection. If I have a satellite passing over a site every 90 minutes, I can see how things move. A real tank needs maintenance. People walk up to it. It moves to a different position. A decoy often just sits there for days or weeks. If an AI sees a fleet of 20 tanks that has not moved an inch in 3 weeks despite a supposed military exercise, it starts to get suspicious.
I love that idea of time being the ultimate truth teller. You can fake a moment, but it is much harder to fake a month. Now, Daniel specifically brought up the Iranian nuclear sites. There have been reports about tunnels being dug so deep that they are basically immune to conventional bunker busters. When you were looking at something like the Natanz or Isfahan sites, what are the specific clues an analyst is looking for to verify what is happening underground?
For a site like that, you are looking at the external infrastructure. You look at the power lines. A facility that is enriching uranium needs a massive, steady supply of electricity. If you see high voltage lines running into a mountain, and those lines are drawing a load consistent with thousands of centrifuges, that is a huge indicator. You also look at the water. Centrifuges need cooling. If you see water being pumped from a nearby river into the site, and the return water is 5 degrees warmer, you know there is industrial activity happening inside that mountain.
And I assume you can see the temperature difference in the water using the same thermal sensors we talked about.
Exactly. Thermal sensing is great for tracking liquid flows. But there is another technology that is even more impressive for seeing through deception, and that is synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. Unlike a camera which needs sunlight, SAR sends out its own radar pulses and measures how they bounce back. It can see through clouds, through smoke, and even through some types of camouflage netting.
Wait, it can see through camouflage? How does that work?
It depends on the wavelength of the radar. Some wavelengths can penetrate through thin materials like canvas or plastic netting, but will bounce off the solid metal of a vehicle or a missile launcher underneath. So you might have a site that looks like a harmless pile of hay to a regular camera, but to an SAR satellite, it looks like a battery of S-300 surface-to-air missiles.
That is incredible. So you really cannot hide anymore. But then I think about the Iranian example again. If they're burying the entrances, they're trying to hide the point of access. Is that just to protect it from a physical strike? Or are they trying to hide the fact that the entrance even exists?
It is both. In the world of intelligence, we talk about denial and deception. Denial is when you stop the enemy from seeing something. Deception is when you make them see something else. By burying an entrance, you are denying the enemy a precise targeting point for a missile. If you do not know exactly where the door is, it is much harder to knock. But you are also trying to deceive them about the scale of the facility. If the visible footprint is small, you might underestimate how many centrifuges are spinning 300 feet below the surface.
But as you said, the dirt gives it away. The spoil.
The spoil is the Achilles heel of any underground project. During the Cold War, the Soviets were masters of this. They would build entire cities underground, but they would hide the dirt by dumping it into existing mines or using it to build fake hills and landscaping. Modern analysts use hyperspectral imaging to combat this. This is a step beyond thermal. It looks at hundreds of different bands of light to determine the chemical composition of the surface.
So they can tell if the dirt on the surface matches the rock from deep underground?
Precisely. If you have a limestone mountain, but the dirt on the surface has the chemical signature of deep-seated granite that has been freshly excavated, the jig is up. The hyperspectral sensor can see that chemical mismatch from space. It is like a forensic lab that covers the whole world.
It feels like the more we talk about this, the more impossible it seems to actually keep a secret. But nations still try. Why? Is it just about making it more expensive for the watcher?
That is a huge part of it. Intelligence is a resource game. If I can force an adversary to spend 10 times more money and use 10 times more analysts to find my secret, that is a win. Even if they eventually find it, I have diverted their attention and resources. And sometimes, deception is meant to be found.
Wait, what do you mean? Like a double bluff?
Exactly. Think about it. If I want you to think I am building a nuclear site in location A, I might intentionally do a mediocre job of hiding it. I will leave some tracks, maybe a bit of spoil, a few thermal leaks. You find it, you feel clever, and you focus all your satellites and analysts on location A. Meanwhile, the real facility is in location B, where I am being incredibly disciplined and using every trick in the book.
That is the classic shell game. You want the merc to think they have spotted the queen. It reminds me of some of the things we discussed way back in episode 212 when we were talking about the psychology of misinformation. Once someone thinks they have discovered a secret, they become very invested in that being the truth. They stop looking elsewhere.
It is confirmation bias on a geopolitical scale. If an intelligence agency has a theory that a certain country is doing X, and they find the site that looks like it is doing X, they are much less likely to keep searching for the site that is actually doing Y. AI is actually helping with this because it does not have the same biases. An AI model can be programmed to keep searching the entire country with the same level of intensity regardless of what it has already found. It does not get tired or bored, and it does not get a promotion for finding a smoking gun.
That is a great point. The AI is the ultimate objective observer. But I wonder, can you deceive the AI itself? We have talked before about adversarial attacks on machine learning. Could you paint a pattern on the roof of a building that makes an A? I think it is a forest, even if a human can clearly see it is a building.
You absolutely can. There is a whole field of study around adversarial camouflage. You can create these dazzle patterns that exploit how a neural network perceives edges and textures. To a human, it looks like a weird psychedelic mural. To an AI, it looks like a cluster of trees or a pond. There was a famous study where researchers created a patch you could wear on your shirt that would make an object detection. AI think you are invisible. The same principle applies to buildings and military hardware.
So we are entering an era of AI versus AI deception. One AI is trying to spot the anomaly, and another AI is trying to design the perfect camouflage to fool it. It is an arms race of algorithms.
It is, and it is happening in real time. But here is the thing, Corn. The humans are still the final arbiters. At the end of the day, an AI flags an anomaly, but a human analyst at the NGA or the Mossad or the CIA is the one who looks at it and says, wait, that doesn't look right. They bring in the other INT's human intelligence, or HUMINT signals intelligence, or SIGINT. Maybe they have a spy on the ground who can confirm what is in those trucks. Maybe they are intercepting the radio calls from the construction site. The satellite is just one piece of the puzzle.
It is the all-source approach. You never rely on just one thing. I want to go back to Daniel's question about the specific clues. We talked about thermal, we talked about SAR, we talked about spoil. What about something as simple as the shadows? You mentioned it briefly with the inflatable tanks, but I have heard that shadows are one of the hardest things to fake in satellite imagery.
They are incredibly difficult because they change every minute of the day. If you are building a fake building or a fake airplane, it has to cast a shadow that matches the position of the sun at that exact moment. If an analyst looks at a series of images taken at different times and notices that the shadow of a building is not moving or is the wrong length for the time of year, they know it is a two-dimensional painting or a low-profile decoy.
A painting? People actually paint fake features on the ground?
Oh, all the time. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviets would paint fake shadows of airplanes on their runways to make it look like they had more bombers than they actually did. But again, that only works for a static image. As soon as you have high revisit satellites like we do now, you can see the shadow failing to move as the sun crosses the sky. It looks ridiculous once you see it in a time lapse.
It is like that scene in a movie where the character realizes they are looking at a photograph instead of the real world, because a clock is not ticking. So, Herman, what is the state of the art right now? If a country like Iran or North Korea really wants to hide something from the eyes in the sky in February 2026, What is their best bet?
Their best bet is deep, multi-layered concealment combined with rigorous operational security. You bury the facility deep in a mountain that has existing industrial activity. Maybe you put your centrifuge hall under a legitimate cement factory. You use the same power, the same trucks, the same workers. You hide the signal and the noise. This is what we call hiding in plain sight. If you can make your secret facility indistinguishable from 1,000 other legitimate factories, you have won.
The purloined letter strategy. Put it right on the mantelpiece where everyone can see it, but nobody recognizes what it is. That seems much more effective than trying to build a fake mountain.
It is, but it requires incredible discipline. One mistake, one truck driver talking too much on an unencrypted phone, one thermal leak that is not properly managed, and the whole thing comes crashing down. And with the resolution of commercial satellites now hitting 15 centimeters through advanced processing, you can see individual people. You can see the types of tools they are carrying. You can see the brand of the air conditioning units on the roof.
15 centimeters. That is what, 6 inches? You can basically see a dinner plate from space.
Just about. At that resolution, you are not just looking for buildings, you are looking for people and their habits. Do the security guards change shifts at the same time every day? Do they carry the same weapons? Is there a specific car that always parks in the VIP spot? This is where the AI really shines. It can track thousands of these tiny details across years of data and find the one thing that changed.
It is the ultimate big data problem. I am curious about the ethical side of this too. We are talking about state actors, but this technology is available to almost anyone now. What does this mean for privacy? If I can buy 15-centimeter imagery of my neighbor's backyard or a company's secret testing grounds, where does it end?
That is the million-dollar question. We are moving into a world of radical transparency. It is getting harder and harder for anyone, a government, a corporation, or an individual to have a physical secret. There are companies now that sell economic intelligence based on satellite data. They count the cars in Walmart parking lots to predict quarterly earnings. They measure the shadows of oil tanks to see how much oil is being stored globally. They look at the light emissions from cities to estimate GDP growth in countries that might be faking their numbers.
It is a check on reality. You can lie on your balance sheet, but you cannot lie to the satellite about how many trucks are leaving your warehouse.
Exactly, and that is why Daniel's prompt is so relevant. Deception is the response to that transparency. As the watchers get better, the liars have to get more creative. It is a fundamental part of the human condition, I think. We have always tried to see what is hidden and hide what we do not want seen.
It is the eternal game. I want to circle back to the Iranian nuclear sites one more time, because that is such a high-stakes example. When we hear reports that all entrances have been buried, like Daniel mentioned, is that a sign of desperation or a sign of confidence?
I would argue it is a sign of adaptation. They know they are being watched every second of every day. They know that Israel and the US have incredible intelligence capabilities. Burying the entrances is a way to raise the cost of an attack. It says, "We know you can see us, but we are going to make it as hard as possible for you to do anything about it." It is a defensive form of deception. They are not necessarily trying to convince you the site is not there. They are trying to convince you that attacking it is not worth the effort.
Like a porcupine. It is not hidden, but it is not easy to eat.
That is a perfect analogy. And for the analysts, the challenge is to keep looking past the quills. They are looking for the soft underbelly. Maybe it is a ventilation shaft 3 miles away. Maybe it is a fiber optic cable being laid in a trench. There is always a clue. The Earth never stays perfectly still when humans are working on it.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I'm going to be looking at Google Earth very differently tonight. Before we wrap up, Herman, do you have any final thoughts on where this is going? What is the next big leap in satellite surveillance?
I think the next leap is persistent, all-weather, real-time surveillance. Right now, we still have gaps. A satellite passes over, then it is gone for an hour. But we are seeing the launch of constellations, hundreds of small satellites like those from SpaceX's Starshield or Black Sky, that work together to provide a constant video feed of the entire planet. Imagine being able to rewind the world. An explosion happens in a city. And you can just scroll back the video to see exactly which car planted the bomb and where that car came from 3 days ago. That is where we are headed.
Total recall for the entire planet. That is both incredible and terrifying.
It really is. And the decoys of the future will have to be just as dynamic. They will have to move, they will have to breathe, they will have to live. It is going to be a wild ride.
Well, I think we have given Daniel a lot to think about. From inflatable tanks in World War II to 15-centimeter resolution and AI-driven change detection in 2026, the art of deception is more complex than ever.
It definitely is. And hey, if you are listening and you have a weird prompt of your own, maybe something about technology, history, or just a strange observation about the world, we want to hear it. Daniel is the one who usually finds these gems, but we are always open to more.
Absolutely. You can get in touch with us through the contact form at myweirdprompts.com. And while you are there, you can check out our full archive of episodes. We have covered everything from the ethics of AI to the secret history of Jerusalem.
And if you are enjoying the show, we would really appreciate a quick review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find us and keeps the show growing. We have been doing this for over 500 episodes now, and it is the support from you guys that keeps us going.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. Well, Herman, I think that is a wrap for episode 556. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.